where the Prime Minister was sworn in along with many of his ministers, assistant ministers, etc., etc. And this does make me need to breathe some life into an old nickname that I had for the Prime Minister, which was Each Way Albo. Now, in 2022, we've got to go way back to one of his first days as Prime Minister to show you when he was sworn in 2022. Different Governor-General, same Prime Minister, and a decision not to place a hand on the Bible, instead to take what is called the Oath of Affirmation. Now, as you know, I'm not a person of faith, but I have respect for people of faith, and I would assume that if you're a person of faith, then not taking the non-believer's affirmation is not the most ultimate way of saying that to the higher power, I surrender and I swear before, in terms of the commitment that is about to be made to the country. But Anthony Albanese made the decision in 2022 that he would take the oath, take the affirmation, not the oath, not have a Bible, rather than take the oath and have the Bible. This was interesting. It was even noted by the scribes at the time that he had decided to take the secular affirmation rather than swearing before God. The Catholic Weekly, which I'll be honest, I don't read often, but still, they noted here that the Bible is out and the affirmation is in. Anthony Albanese has raised eyebrows across several religious groups just seconds into taking office by selecting to be sworn in as Prime Minister by way of making a secular affirmation without reference to God, rather than taking an oath on the Bible. Now, this version of Each Way Albo goes even further back than 2022. You see, one of the reasons the Labor Party was able to convince itself that it lost in 2019, because it clearly, they say, wasn't their climate policies. They kept those. Remember, they just told you 275 and hundreds of thousands of jobs. No, one of the reasons, according to their review, was that Scott Morrison visibly believed in God, that Scott Morrison was a committed Christian, one willing to be photographed on Easter Sunday amongst the faithful in his parish. Now, you remember how the left mocked him and therefore millions of people around the country for his belief. So today I went and decided to have a look to double check that that was what happened and what was one of the things the Labor Party said they had to do differently. The 2019 review into the federal election campaign is this document. In this document, it has, in very specific chapters, a chapter about explaining the swings. We're on page 61. You can find out about Christian voters. And on page 61, it says, the party would be wise to reconnect with people of faith on social justice issues and emphasise its historic links to the mainstream church. In and about, as you can see there, it makes reference to the visibility of faith that the former Prime Minister Scott Morrison had. Now, Andrew Bolt did a better job of noticing this than I'm doing right now a couple of weeks ago, but it's worth pointing out again that the bloke who was sworn into office without the Bible was covering himself in the cloak of faith, which I have no doubt has to be genuine. Surely no politician would perform such a thing. And he's had a quota over a long period of time. The three things to believe in was his football club, the church and the Labor Party. But he certainly really dialed it up in the last election. Remember, we're suspending campaigning while obviously still campaigning because, as the 2019 document said, religion, the embracing or the rejecting of it, has an overt political consequence. Hence why, if you're actually suspending a campaign, you do nothing. But by clearing the normal rules of a campaign, meaning no press conferences, no questions, no one pushing back, no one asking about your motivations, it means the pictures that went all over the different forms of news were those of a Prime Minister on Easter Sunday and a Prime Minister who said this about a Pope who he had never met.
Pope Francis lived out his faith and vocation in word and deed. He was truly inspirational. In his modest way of life and at his weekly audiences, he demonstrated his commitment to peace, equality and inclusion.
So we know that this could well be a good Catholic boy speaking about the passing of a pope, but it's also a hyper-political man trying to learn the lessons from politicians past and elections past. When talking about his own personal faith, again, conveniently around this time where we're definitely not campaigning, he said this.
Look, I try not to talk about my faith in public. I say I was raised with three great faiths. I've said that a number of times, and at times like this, I think what people do is they draw on who they are, and certainly my Catholicism is just a part of me.
At moments like this, they are drawn on who we are, or who they are, I think was the exact words. So when it came to presenting as a person of faith, appealing to as many people of faith as possible, the Prime Minister was out and proud before an election. But today, when he was sworn in, again for the second time as Prime Minister, we're right back to where we were in 2022. Now, again, I am not a person of faith, so if I held the Bible, it would be an overt act of sort of political pandering. But if I was somebody who had three great loves, who spoke as warmly about the head of his church, who had gone to church publicly on the occasion of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, then you would think the greatest power that you could swear to, that you would uphold the oath that you have just given, would be the very God that you may well not talk about every single day, but you were more than happy to parade when you weren't campaigning. Now, I know that Labor people will say that none of this mattered at the election, and perhaps it didn't. But if one of the reasons why they lost was because they didn't project enough commitment to faith, and the bloke who has won not once but twice since that review is selective in his invocation of faith, I think there's something weird here. Dare I say, the each-way elbow of it. Now, there is nothing more insulting than to talk about somebody's personal faith, because it is theirs and theirs alone. And again, I cannot doubt that whether the Prime Minister is or isn't a person of faith, you have to say that he would be. But why wouldn't he show that by taking the same oath as many Prime Ministers before, with a holy text of many Prime Ministers before? That's why
I, Anthony Norman Albanese, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve the Commonwealth of Australia, her land and her people in the office of Prime Minister.
That's why I say each-way elbow. Again, I can imagine the hate, and no doubt the smoke signals are being sent the way of the new Communications Minister. Do something about him. Ring the bosses, wave the finger. Well, none of that's going to work, because in a democracy you are allowed to question everything, including how fair dinkum the Prime Minister is on all issues, big and small.